All right, good evening, everyone. I'm going to give us a couple moments as people start trickling in. Thank you all for joining us. Happy Thursday. I had to make sure that that was the day. It's been quite the week. We're really excited to be sharing space with y'all tonight. As you're coming in, if you can please take a moment to share your name, your pronouns, and your chapter in the chat. If you are not a DSA member or you are an at-large member, let us know what city you're joining us from tonight. Again, we're really glad to be sharing space with y'all tonight. And as folks are coming in, if you can please share your name, your pronouns, and your chapter. We want to be able to hear from where folks are coming in from. And then also just a general note, make sure that you are sending your message with panelists and attendees. Otherwise, only the panelists will be able to see your comment, which is not a bad thing, but we want to make sure that other attendees can see where folks are joining us from. We've got some folks from Louisville, from Jackson, Mississippi. Welcome. We have Chico. Hello. California's in the house. Awesome. Asheville, welcome. Hello. Good to see everyone. We have some folks from Ohio. Thanks so much. Again, if you're just joining us, we are taking a moment to introduce ourselves in the chat. If you can share your name, your pronouns, and your chapter. And if you are not a DSA member, totally okay, welcome. Just let us know what city you're joining us from tonight. And if you are not large member, you can also share what city you're joining us from. So great. I see some Texans. Awesome. Hello. Welcome. Thanks so much, everyone, for being on with us tonight. All right. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to let the introductions continue. And folks can continue letting us know where they're tuning in from tonight. For those of you who are joining us via the webinar, just a few reminders of how to be a comrade. We ask that you be respectful of the facilitator and our panelists tonight during the discussion. If you share anything, make sure to speak for yourself and not make any broad generalizations. And lastly, let's each do our part to make sure the shared space is not only a safe one, but a brave one. We are all learning and growing, so let's approach this with grace for ourselves and for each other. And if that sounds good to y'all, I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Christian Hernandez. I'm based in Texas. My pronouns are she, her, ella, and I'm an elected member of the National Political Committee, the political leadership body of the Democratic Socialists of America. And I'm proud to be kicking off our introductory call for the Abolition Working Group of DSA. I'm imagining some loud applause. So the mission of the Abolition Working Group is to build DSA's internal capacity to do abolitionist work, as well as bolstering existing campaign work towards defund, decarceration, and of course, abolition. The Abolition Working Group came into formation in May of 2020 after combining two resolutions that were passed at our 2019 DSA convention, the End Cash Bail Resolution and the Criminal Justice and Decarceration Resolution, as well as addressing additional dynamics in the country at the time and work that spoke to its exigency. Since then, the NPC, or the National Political Committee, has appointed a steering committee of committed abolitionist DSA members to lead these efforts, including Dawn Harrington, who you will meet later on in this call. And one of the first tasks of this working group was administering a chapter survey to assess what work, if any, existed in our 240 plus chapters. And it's clear that abolitionist work is still new to DSA, but it is also imperative to our socialist vision. The decades-long work of Black feminist thinkers and organizers brought abolition forward as a framework and a practice. And this struggle is aimed at the creation of a society that has no use for policing and prisons. They have laid out not only the obsolete nature of these institutions, but have also shown how the prison industrial complex is woven into every fabric of the capitalist system. Policing and prisons have been used as tools of class warfare, as instruments of white supremacy that reinforce racial disparities and violence. And this racist system has serious repercussions for the entire working class. As socialists, we should care about abolition as the path forward. For the sake of collective liberation, for the creation of a sustainable and radical democracy, we must abolish the prison industrial complex in every manner that it shows up in our lives. To start, we must recognize what we've inherited from the systems we are trying to fight, both the internalized and the externalized. This country, too, must address and reconcile its history and materially atone for the harm and premature death upon which empire was built. We must challenge policing here and abroad, never forgetting this work is international and foregrounding those connections with intention. As socialists, we are fighting for ownership of the decisions that affect our lives, and abolition, too, is about owning our responsibilities to each other to address harm and transform through care rather than violence or inviting the state into our conflicts. This requires a deeper understanding and practice of abolitionist politics and a rejection of the premise upon which capitalism is founded on our own disposability. A commitment to abolition is a rejection of violence between individuals, from the state, and from the oppressive systems that govern our society. The last year has been, to put it mildly, a crisis clusterfuck. A global pandemic, a right-wing insurrection, an ever-present climate disaster, and an expanding police state, and no real power to confront it. Slowly but surely, however, there is movement. The defund demand clarifies our enemies. It shows that there's no reforming capitalism. It is working the way it is supposed to. And by taking part in the fight for abolition, we are also in the struggle for socialism. The working class can and must build the power necessary to achieve this. Abolition must be central to our fight. It is a key political struggle. And it must be felt not just in the streets, but in our workplaces, by ensuring that workplaces are doing their part in supporting these demands. This work is anti-capitalist by undermining the scope and authority of the carceral state. It makes way for us to create the institutions of a socialist society where our needs are the driving force, not the profit of the capitalist class, where education, jobs, housing, and healthcare are givens and not indicators of status. For too long, prisons and jails and borders have been used by the capitalist class to hide the face of capitalism, to deflect how the system at its core thrives on racism, patriarchy, poverty, and other social ills. A better world is possible if we fight for it, if we do the organizing work required to show that we deserve more than this. Abolition is not a dream, but a practice. It changes us and charges us to imagine a better world and concretely make it possible through models rooted in care and the collective. These demands will transform us just as they do the systems we are fighting against. And we will change and change until the old world no longer exists and the new world breathes free. Now, while we have members who've been doing this work for a long time, DSA is no doubt new to abolitionist organizing and stands to learn a lot, not only from the countless abolitionists of decades past, but from many brilliant organizers who are doing the work today. I'm now honored to introduce you to three of them who will be sharing their experiences, takeaways, and how to bring people into the abolitionist movement. We have Andrea James, founder and executive director of Families for Justice is Healing, and the founder of the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. We have Rukia Lumumba, founder and executive director of the People's Advocacy Institute and co-director of the Electoral Justice Project of the Movement for Black Lives. And we have Dawn Harrington, executive director of Free Hearts and hub mentor of the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. I'm really looking forward to learning from all of y'all tonight. We're going to start off with a few questions that will give us a little more insight into abolition broadly and how you got involved. So this question is for everyone. What does abolition mean to you? What brought you to becoming an abolitionist? And how does abolition show up in the work that you're doing? We can start with Andrea first.
Oh, okay. Hi. Christian, if you could send over that intro, that would be fantastic. That was one of the most powerful intros that I've heard in a long time, and just hit some really incredibly beautiful points. Hi, everybody. I'm Andrea James from the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, and from all of our other sister organizations around the country. Really happy to be here. How would you like me to answer all three of those, or one at a time, and we can rotate around?
Totally up to you, but I feel like those questions are kind of related, so I feel like that'll naturally come about.
Okay, well, I'll get myself out of the way so we can hear from the folks that we learned from, Rukia and Dawn. I think I was born into an abolitionist family. I'm really proud of that, very happy of that. My parents, who are alive and well at 91 and 89, really raised us to do this work, to challenge systems of oppression and control. And we had a beautiful upbringing in doing that. It caused me at one point in my life to want to become a criminal defense lawyer, which I did. I'm from the beautiful community of Roxbury, Massachusetts, but we live still, our family has been in that home for 5 generations. My granddaughters are the 5th generation. And right now it's entangled as the most incarcerated corridor in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And so whether it was coming up in my family, or whether it was becoming a youth organizer very young, or whether it was doing organizing as an adult prior to becoming a criminal defense lawyer, or becoming a criminal defense lawyer, and then becoming an organizer again inside of prison when I was sentenced to serve a 2-year federal prison sentence for transgression in my real estate law practice. That was the alchemy, I guess I want to say, of all of those life experiences were my introduction to abolition. And really, though, when I feel as though I grew into the work of abolition as an abolitionist and a revolutionary for abolition, came at the time of my incarceration. And so in 2010, I was sentenced to serve a 2-year federal prison sentence, and I walked into a prison in Danbury, Connecticut. You know, I live in Roxbury, Massachusetts. I was sent to Connecticut. I left behind my husband, my baby boy, who was only 5 months old at the time, my 12-year-old daughter, and 2 young adult daughters. And so I was fortunate. I had to figure out how to navigate 24 months in that prison. These people had been, that I met, who were the founders as well as myself of the National Council, had been buried in that prison for decades. Justine Moore, Virginia Douglas, Phyllis Hardy, our matriarch of our organization, she had been in prison for 22 years by the time I got there for drug convictions. And so this was something that was just, you know it, you're engaged in the community, you're growing up with people who are cycled all around you in and out of incarceration for generations. I was a criminal defense attorney. I stood in front of countless judges in courtrooms across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, defending people against the criminal legal system. But you don't really understand it up front and personal until you are on that bunk and you look above that bunk. And I'll never forget the day I said, my God, this is what it must have been like, of course, in a more horrific way, to be packed in on a slave ship. That prison is the next iteration of slavery, and nowhere does that play itself out pictorially than inside of a prison, where you see that. And so that for me was the origins of abolition. And we sat in that prison yard in 2010 as incarcerated women, and hearing the uptick in conversation around that from Michelle Alexander. We didn't hear anything about after her writing of the book, The New Jim Crow. Many others have written, including many incarcerated people have been writing to try and get the attention of the American public about the need to end incarceration. But for some reason, Michelle's book really struck a chord, and it was an excellent chronology of from slavery to mass incarceration. And we heard about this, but we heard nothing about ourselves, as at that time, in the prison in Danbury, there were about 1,800 of us from the camp down to the main prison. And so we made a point, sitting at a table in the yard, in the prison yard, that we were going to use our voices and our experiences to end incarceration of women and girls. And we've never wavered from that goal. Just moving quickly to kind of wrap this up for me, we embarked upon a 2.5 year listening tour around the country, from kitchen tables to medium-sized convenings to large convenings to town hall meetings. We dumped all that information out on the table to find out what are the most directly affected women and girls around the country think needs to happen. And these were all from an abolitionist perspective. Naturally, that's what abolition is. We want to give it some strict framework and try and make it defined like the current criminal legal system defines itself, with all of these rubrics and all of these structures and all of these grandiose, positions with judges sitting up high and prosecutors and stuff. We're not replicating that type of system in abolition. Abolition is about organic processes. It's about people in their neighborhoods coming together to figure out what different looks like. And so we embarked upon that by taking all of the information from this 2.5-year listening tour, dumping it on the table. And then we came out with what we call Reimagining Communities. And we named it that. The sisterhood named it that because it's a direct pushback to a narrative that's been carried on in this country for far too long by national nonprofits who aren't led by directly affected people. And that narrative was reimagining prisons. Well, we're tired of reimagining prisons. We're tired of engaging in those discussions, and no longer shall we do that. We believe that a prison will never be a place for a woman, a girl, or any other person to heal and advance their lives. If you have not lived in a prison, please don't challenge that. Trust those of us who have, and also trust us to lead the way in creating what different looks like. And under Reimagining Communities, between that and our national campaign to end incarceration of women and girls, which officially launched in January, we are doing just that. There's about 250,000 women in this country that are in a cage, in a jail, in a detention center somewhere, in a prison. 250,000 is not a large number when you start breaking it down based on states. Massachusetts, we've got about 500 women in a prison somewhere or a jail. Vermont has 77 women when we were up there two weeks ago, incarcerated. There is absolutely no reason why we cannot end incarceration of women and girls. Start with our elderly, start with our sick, start with our survived and punished, start with our pregnant women, start with our long timers who just need to come home 20, 30 years in. We can do this. We need a coalition of people who will help us to get there. And we're here for anybody who is interested in becoming part of this national campaign. We've launched it. It's starting in the New England states right now. We have a clemency quilt tour that's happening starting on June 7th, going around the country, of women who are in all those categories I mentioned, who are incarcerated in every single state, to really give a picture to what's happening. And we, of course, have the 100 Women campaign on the federal level to push the 100 women through clemency out by the Biden administration, and encouraging governors to do the same, but not waiting for this system to change. I'll just close here by saying we have no confidence ever. Every day, and you'll hear from Don, you'll hear from Rukia. We learned from Rukia about the People's Assembly process. We went to Mississippi. We sat at her elbow and the elbow of her team. We were trained by her, continued to be trained by Rukia in the People's Assembly process. And we lead with that. We lead with the People's Assembly process to figure out how in our own neighborhoods, we can lead ourselves and gut these buildings that they call prisons. They will still remain, but our goal is that our people will no longer be in them. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, Andrea, and definitely agree. Reimagining prisons is how we got to this point in the first place. If we let them build the jails, they will fill them. And so I think it's super important, yes, that we take the lead of those who are feeling the impacts of that firsthand. I'm gonna pass this over now to Rukia. What does abolition mean to you? How did you become an abolitionist, and what role does it play in your work?
Hey, everybody. Much love and appreciation, one, for people's time to be here to listen to us. Andrea James is, for me, one person who I deeply, deeply respect and listen to all the time whenever I can. And as much as, she says she learns from me and Don, I learn from her. I won't speak for you, Don. You already said it earlier, but I'll let you speak for yourself. Definitely learn from her. And the National Council for Women and Girls is a significant and important space in this world. And why girls, why women? Because we need something that focuses on women. Oftentimes, women that are incarcerated are left out of the conversation. And so a space that's created to really tell those stories was really important. So Rukia Lumumba People's Advocacy Institute in Jackson, Mississippi. What got me started in abolition work? When did I become an abolitionist? I always knew that I didn't like the American system of government. I did not like, I studied government, in undergrad, as well as went to law school purposely to learn more about the law and policy and how to disrupt the system and create new alternatives, a new system. I knew I was an abolitionist for sure as it relates to ending mass incarceration after 3 of my friends started serving their first year on a life sentence while I was serving my first year in college. And they were all a year younger than me, all still in high school, in their teens. I think the oldest was 16, the youngest went in at 14. And for me, I could not imagine how you could literally throw away the key on a young person. And I knew that I had to create something different. It wasn't enough to go in the courtroom and argue for someone's defense. It wasn't enough to me. And I wanted to be able to do more than that. I wanted to be able to create systems that actually talked about the healing, the restoration, and the accountability that folks needed in order to move forward from a time of harm, a time of violence. And so that's when I knew I was an abolitionist. What was the other question? Sorry.
The other question was, how does abolition show up in your work?
Yeah, I mean, People's Advocacy Institute. I'm also the co-director of the Electoral Justice Project of the Movement for Black Lives. And so I say that we work at the intersection of criminal justice and electoral justice, understanding that that there is a route and a rule and a combination of those things, right? Like they exist not as separate entities, but as entities that flow within each other. And so we are an abolitionist organization, right? We consider ourselves an incubator for transformative justice in the South, meaning that we work with community members to actually realize their alternative solutions, whether that's to climate crises, whether that's to environmental justice, whether that's to ending the carceral state here in Mississippi, to issues of policing. We work to be a vehicle, a vessel rather, for folks to create the alternative solutions that we know will hopefully keep us healthier. So I'll pass it on. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Definitely. I mean, that's what we're here for, is to be that alternative, to create those alternatives, and to collectively come to those important decisions as to how we transform both ourselves and the world around us. So thank you for sharing. I'm going to go next to Dawn. Can you share your view on abolition, how you became involved, and what role abolition has played in your work?
Thank you. First of all, just want to say thank you so much, DSA, for having me. And it is a huge honor to be on here with 2 of my great mentors that I learned from so much all the time. And there could be no me without these 2 powerful sisters on this call. And I'm also honored to be a member of the DSA National Abolition Working Group. So I'm very humbled and grateful to be a part of this discussion. So for me, it was easy to become an abolitionist. I am from 37208. The zip code that I'm from has the top incarceration rate for people that were born between 1980 and 1986. My brother, multiple family members, friends, and myself are formerly incarcerated, and none of us should have been incarcerated in the first place. But there are things that we did need And so to me, abolition was a no-brainer. And what it means to me, so there's a Angela Davis quote that says, prisons do not disappear social problems, they disappear human beings. Homelessness, unemployment, drug addiction, mental illness, and illiteracy are only a few of the problems that disappear from public view when the human beings contending with them are relegated to cages. As a formerly incarcerated woman that's organizing currently and formerly incarcerated women and girls and families impacted by incarceration here in Nashville and across the state of Tennessee with Free Hearts, and nationally and internationally with the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, we intimately know how true that Angela Davis quote is. So for me, abolition is about abolishing the material conditions that as a society we address with violent and the real criminal apparatus that is the carceral state, and that's including but not limited to police, ICE, probation and parole, criminalization and the manufacturing of crimes, juvenile detention, jails, prisons, ICE detention centers, bail, ankle shackles, criminal legal debt, the exportation of mass incarceration to our sister countries abroad, and all of the other tentacles of this racist, classist, xenophobic, misogynist, homophobic, transphobic system that entangles us for life and breaks up our families, destabilizes our communities for generations. Like Andrea said, slavery was abolished in the United States, but it wasn't abolished for us. So the time for abolition is far past. And we do that not only by what we burn down, but more importantly, it's about what we're building up. It's about creating spaces, like it's been said, for communities to be able to have a radical imagination, to be able to have the space to dream, to address their own problems in creative ways. It's about reparations for this violence that has been done to us and to our communities. It's about not recreating capitalism, but building things that are collective and cooperative and socialist. The capitalist state necessitates police and prisons, so we must also ultimately abolish capitalism as a whole. We cannot have a system with a class of haves and have-nots, because the system of capitalism needs incarceration and police and state violence to survive. So no, the Koch brothers will not reform us into liberation. We will not, get there, because it's not in their best interest to do so. So, abolition shows up in all of our work and everything we do. We fight to shrink the carceral state. We fight to abolish capitalism until it no longer exists, and it will no longer exist. And we do that by building what we really need and building it together.
Freaking mic drop. Yes, Dawn, thank you. Absolutely. Could not agree more. I'm definitely seeing all of that sentiment being echoed, applauded in the chat. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to move us to a little bit more about the sort of broadly what's happening right now. We've witnessed the shift as defund became a widespread demand last summer. Decades of collective organizing, however, is what brought us to this point. So what would you say is your assessment of the landscape of abolitionist organizing in the current political moment? And we'll go back to Andrea for this one.
Let's see. So I think it's healthy. The state of abolitionist organizing is healthy right now, and evidenced by what you've just heard from Rukia and Dawn, and all of the work, the full body of work that these sisters represent. And we feel strong we feel that there are paths opening every day for us. Once we let go of the feeling the need to think that we have to still go along to get along. Once we understood acutely that this system is not going to ever relent and be fair and give up the extortion and the using of bodies of Black, brown, indigenous, poor people for the gain of just a tiny group of people, and that all the wealth would go to them and we would struggle to even feed our children, which is something that we saw just play itself out during the pandemic. Literally, you know, mothers who didn't have any food and nobody gave a shit. But what really made me feel as though we were really coming together and knowing that there is this movement happening was that we reached out to each other for support. We all supported each other. Don Freehats, Tennessee, Rukia and Jackson, Mississippi, and a whole host of sisterhood and family, movement family came together to share resources out of nothing, to make sure that we started, went back to the basics of local cooperative businesses because we had nowhere else to go, made sure that we shared mutual aid, made sure that we figured out how to lift up and sustain the mamas and their babies and the daddies and their babies and the families and their babies, the folks, the parents. And that was encouraging because when this pandemic hit, for us, the pandemic are prisons. That's what the pandemic has. We've been in a pandemic. But the pandemic on top of that pandemic that took the lives of so many of our people inside that nobody paid attention to. Every time we got a weekly action from Rukia in Mississippi, who was fighting to stop that deluge of Black bodies dying inside of prisons due to COVID-19 that had already been dying because they were in a prison in Mississippi, gave us courage to know that we were going to get through this, and we were going to get through this because we were no longer waiting for this current, this capitalist system of racism and oppression and control to give us whatever support it was going to give us in whatever austere way that it was going to provide it. It built strength in me and in our team and in our organization and in our work and in our little piece of the movement, the little pebble of sand on the beach that we are, to know that we're in this together and that this movement is strong. This movement is strong and that we are moving collectively. And the pandemic, I think, strengthened that for us as difficult, challenging, heartbreaking as this past year has been, on top of the heartbreak and struggle that we have already been navigating through.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you so much, Andrea. Absolutely. I'm going to take us over to Rukia next.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrea. That, You know, every time you talk, I learn. And Don, come through. Like, come on, Don. Like, you just, you put the fire under us. Thank you. You know, I was sitting here thinking of how to answer this question. And the first word that came to me was generative. I think that abolition right now in this time is very generative. We're producing things. We're not talking, learning, and leaving it there in the study room. We're actually building the alternatives, all of us. I mean, Andrea, Dawn, probably many of you that are tuned in are actually working on the ground to build the alternative systems that we need, the alternative programs, services, policies, all of it, right? When I look at work across the nation, you see places like Freedom Inc. out in Wisconsin, right? That is doing amazing work around community-led public safety, specifically as it relates to folks that are in domestic violence situations. You know, you look further around the work that Andrea and team are doing around reimagining communities. You look at the work that's happening across the nation around building alternatives to policing, whether it's through programs like Cure Violence or programs like the Credible Messenger Justice work that's happening across the nation. It is led by people who have been most impacted by violence, specifically by state violence in the form of incarceration, state violence in the form of over-policing, state violence in policing in general, state violence in the form of what we look at as economic violence. And that's a violence against the ability to live a good quality of life, to have stable housing and so forth and so on. So I think that we see that we are in a very generative time where people are willing to take a chance to develop something that we haven't seen before and experiment to see if it is the right way to go. And it is experimentation that is guided and led by people who have been harmed by these systems the most, the current systems the most. The last thing I'll say is that I think one of the most fruitful and more long-term experiment that we're engaging in right now are the assemblies. Andrea will tell you, I'm going to always talk about the assemblies, and I so appreciate the council for using it as a tool for co-governance and folks leading their work. The assembly process is one that is it's not a program. It doesn't have a timeline. It is something that is owned by the people. And the value in it, especially in a space of abolition, is that it is truly a process by which we shift our culture and how we make decisions, shift our culture around how we develop policies and practices that govern our lives. So it really is about shifting the paradigm from being governed to actually governing as community members ourselves. It's also about really moving us towards a more collective leadership style, one that pushes for elected officials to not just speak for us, but instead be directed by us. So one example I always give is my father would come into a room, the late Mayor Chokwe Lumumba. He would come into a room as city council person first and then as mayor, and he would say in an assembly, and he would say he would present the issue before him, or someone would present the issue to him, or the ballot, or whatever is to be voted on. And he would say, how should I vote, right? So as that representative for the people in government, he would allow the people, the residents, folks who live and breathe and work in these spaces, to actually make the decisions around how and what policies and practices should be implemented. And that's important. That's critical. Because once we began to shift our mindset, right, around what is possible, then we can literally see a more fruitful environment for all of us. We'll see better housing. Our people are smart. We are all smart, and the masses of our people are smart. Smart in that they know what they've experienced and they know what will help in terms of getting us to a better place. And so we got to trust each other. We got to trust our people, but we got to educate ourselves as well. And so I'll be quiet.
I'm like, no, you can keep going. That's great. Absolutely. And thank you so much for reminding us of the importance of creating in the face of a system that just takes so much from us. I'm going to go to Dawn next to talk about her assessment of the landscape right now.
Yes, Abolition. Okay, yeah. So I definitely think that this is an opportune time right now. In 2019, Free Hearts did a statewide survey and tour and really got a temperature check on where people were all across our state of Tennessee on abolition and ideas for alternatives. And I ain't gonna lie, people really weren't on abolition at that time, especially like some of our neighbors in rural parts of the state and things like that. People had a lot of different ideas, but some of the things that we were putting out there, they were like, no, I don't understand that. And then last year, there was a shift in the atmosphere. And I really appreciate Rukia for teaching us about the People's Movement Assembly, because we've used that in our work. And in our National People's Budget Coalition, shout out to Middle Tennessee DSA, who is a big part of our coalition as well. Last year, we got over 5,000 survey responses in 3 days around the budget. And over half the people were like, abolish the police, the DA's office, abolish all incarceration. Like, they weren't on that in 2019 because we checked. And so that's just Nashville, but we've been seeing the same thing across the state and across the country. You see, you've seen them having to talk about it during the presidential election cycle, all up in the media, past presidents even, weighing in. And so the season has definitely changed. We have to be able to pay attention to what the season is. And, shout out to Carlos Saavedra, who teaches us about, movement ecology and the season. And the season has shifted. People are realizing our collective power. And, as taxpayers and citizens, understanding that this extreme violence that's happening to our neighbors is supposedly being done on our behalf with our money. And they're outraged. So I think we just have to, recognize the opportunity that is now and double down. It's time right now for all hands on deck, all hands on the plow. And, I believe that another world is possible. I've always believed it, but now I believe in some ways that it's already here. And so we need to recognize that and, full steam ahead.
Thanks so much, Dawn. And thank you for, charging us with the idea that this is an opportunity for us to, it's an opportunity for us to take. And it is an opportunity for us to be able to continue the legacy, the long, arduous work of abolitionists that came before, that are currently doing that work. Because the more of us that are involved, the more that folks can rest and pick up the charge. So, I wish we could sit here and chat for forever, but unfortunately we do have a finite amount of time. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out with one final question for all of our panelists that I think will be helpful to everyone joining us tonight, particularly folks who maybe are new to abolition and who have questions. What lessons have you learned in your organizing that you would like to share with others? And I'll start with Andrea.
Oh, boy, the lesson I learned that I learned and have to remind myself, well, there's two things. We always say in our team, timing and messenger. if we're going through a period of struggle, we sit back and pause, and everybody on the team just kind of gets that playing, like, is it the right time? Is it the right messenger? And are we the right messenger? That's one thing. And I think that I ask myself that on a regular basis. And I ask myself that on a regular basis because this is one of the hardest things I've ever done. It is not easy. One, because, you know, every day personally, I go through individual struggle because of, you know, just trauma and my own interpersonal struggles in life. But the more that you become aware, and I know Rukia and Don both were blessed to be from, you know, they came out of families that, you know, taught them this. Don's parents, her mom's a teacher, her dad was just this phenomenal teacher for her, and Rukia's parents. We are all, I think, fortunate to have come out of families. But we were taught things from a very young age that maybe it took us some time as we grew into our own adulthood to really understand about this country and capitalism and oppression, intentional oppression of Black people and indigenous people and brown people and everybody. That when it feels to me, even at my older age, that every day in the work that we do unapologetically to end incarceration of women and girls, we're becoming more aware of that, of the intentionality, the hatred of us, the intentionality of to cause harm and stagnation and death in our people. That is very painful. And so I think what I've learned is that we have to hold ourselves in love as we work and go through these waves in our neighborhoods and in our communities and in our working groups. We have to hold each other in love, because we might have a night where it's beautiful and communities come together wherever we are and people are talking and planning. And then all of a sudden things fall apart. Things just fall apart. And we have to hold each other in love. We have a lot that we're carrying, you know, as we're taught 7 generations before us and 7 generations ahead of us. And it's true. And all of that includes the pain and the trauma from then and now and going forward. So we have to just hold ourselves in love. Having said that, I personally have no tolerance for anybody. Cassandra Frederick said it the best, I think, one day. She said, when you decide to get off the freedom train, don't derail it for the rest of us. We have zero tolerance. We worked very hard to create a space and a platform for formerly incarcerated women to be heard and to be taken seriously and to be researchers and to become researchers and to do our own work. We work very hard for that. But what we will say, particularly to our family who is formerly incarcerated, if you tell your story, please do. We need millions of us telling our stories about that journey into these places that are called prisons and how we navigated through them and back to our communities. Some of us are still not there, many of us. Even when we're home, some of us have lost ourselves into a place of difficult return. If you tell your story, please do so. But if you choose to step out of that space of telling your story because of the work that has gone before us, decades before us, of the path leaders, Sophia Bukhari, of the formerly incarcerated women that have worked so hard to create this platform for us. If you choose to step out of that and into a policy framework, know the history, educate yourself, understand the historical and political context that got us to where we are today. Do not carry water, as Don referred to the Koch brothers who have centered themselves. The ACLU allowing them to center themselves. The NAACP allowing them to center themselves in a criminal legal reform space. Understand that this should not be tolerated. How dare we allow the slave masters, the architects of this, and capitalism and mass incarceration and incarceration in any form, to center themselves now and allow the electeds of this country to adhere to whatever they put forward as next steps, or what they shrouded as a first step. How dare us we allow that to happen? So I encourage people to understand the political and historical context of what got us here. And I've learned that.
Yes. Wow. Thank you so much. Sorry, I always get lost in just everything that gets said, but also find so much resounding lessons to be learned, and definitely agree that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. So super important. Thank you so much, Andrea, for keeping that in mind for all of us here on the call. I'm going to go to Rakia next.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. Love is the key. Unconditional love, unfettered love. It's really critical, even when you are angry and upset and can't stand a person. We have to move forward, understanding that we have a deeper love for our people. So we got to do what is necessary. Thank you, Andrea, for that reminder. My lessons learned: one, that abolition is not scary, and we have to make it plain for our people, so that it doesn't feel scary, right? Just make it plain, the definition, right? It's about creating a new system that works for us. And it is something that can only lead to a better reality for all of us. In the same way that we abolish slavery, we got to abolish systems that continue to oppress and harm and inflict violence on people just because of certain characteristics. And so, and period, just, we just got to abolish that. So I think for me, the messaging piece is what I've learned is really, really important. Making it clear for folks so that folks can see the tangible reality of what we're talking about. So when we talk about abolition and we're talking about policing, we got to offer a suggestion around what an alternative is, right? When we're talking about abolition, we got to talk about how it includes the development of new services, new programs, new realities that actually care for people's wellness, mental health wellness, their healing, and so forth and so on. And I learned that we have to get out of our mind, that we have to get out of our minds and into the field to actually build what is necessary. Mariam Kaba told me once, I was, constantly just asking and asking. Every time I would be on a call with her, I would just say, well, you know, can you just send me the programs that you're doing around healing justice or violence intervention? Like, you know, send me that. I want to take a look. I want to read. I want to know what folks are doing. And she says, look, Rukia, at some point you just got to do it. You just have to do it. Stop researching, stop trying to make it perfect. Just get out there and do it. And so that's a lesson that I learned, that we just got to do it, y'all. We got to experiment, right? And so, and we got to engage. And the most important thing, we got to engage in deep listening. Deep, intentional listening. Come understanding that you have a plan, that you have some ideas, but engage in a conversation, in deep listening, because you may walk away with a different understanding or move in a different way to achieve the goal that is necessary for us. So that's it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm going to close this out with Dawn.
Hey, so my lessons, my first lesson I want to say is centering those that are most directly impacted by issues is key. Experience makes us experts and informs the needs and solutions that need to be created. There's so many nuances to this system. It's so it just has so many parts to it. So you definitely have to center and follow the leadership of directly impacted people, including and especially those that are currently incarcerated and currently being impacted. Another thing is, you know, the power of rural organizing. You know, rural parts of the state have so much state power and so little investment, so little like listening to what the concerns are, connection to, you know, the city coalitions and stuff like that, and you know, and are being impacted at very high rates. And so really connecting with and building statewide power with rural parts of the state is so important. And along those lines, like coalition building is hard. I ain't gonna lie. Like, it's one of the hardest things about this work, but it's so very important, and it's where the magic happens. So commit to building with your comrades, and including like principal struggle, conflict resolution, you know, bringing in rural communities into these coalitions, and let's just figure it out and move forward together. And lastly, I would just say, you know, don't be afraid to dream. You know, imagination is one of my favorite things. When I was a child, just loved to imagine, and I still do. And you know, it's sad because capitalism really just smothers our imagination in so many ways. You know, but we have to get back to the village mentality. I'm a firm believer that if we give all of our gifts, you know, our talents and our ideas, then we have all that we need. Like we have, the people have all that we need, you know. And really, you know, abolition is not a new thing. You know, all of this system of mass incarceration, all of these things that have been created, they didn't always exist. You know, so abolition is about remembering also who we once were, you know, before all of this, you know, getting deep into going back. You know, it's not really as much about, it is creating new things now, but it's also just returning to our village, returning to who we are as a people. And, you know, the people have the power, all power to the people.
Hell yeah, we have what we need. Let's get it done. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dawn. And again, thank you again, Dawn, Rukia, Andrea, for sharing your wisdom and insight, and really for all that you do. I think we would all love to hear more and more from all of you, but definitely appreciate your time and all that we've learned over this call. So thank you again for sharing space with us tonight, and again for sharing your wisdom and insight and experience. So I'm now going to pass it over to my comrade Fatima, who's going to share how you can get involved with the Abolition Working Group for folks who are on the call right now for DSA members.
Yes, just want to say thank you again to Andrea, Rakia, and Dawn for leaving us so inspired and so just committed to this work, remembering how important it is and why we're all here. But yeah, for everyone, all of our listeners, everyone who attended today, we would love to have you join us. The DSA National Working Group is a new group, but we have started putting the foundation down so that we are ready for members to join us. Danielle is going to put a link in the chat for you to sign up and share with your chapters as well for any members who are interested in signing up. So we encourage you to share it out to your membership. We also have a chapter survey about any abolitionist work that you're doing in your chapters. We'd love to hear about it. And so, this was the first of hopefully many events. We're thinking of doing more webinars, maybe book clubs, things like that. Also, we'd love to hear from you what you all are interested in. So again, just really looking forward to a lot of this work being done on the national level, hearing what chapters are working on and then working together. So thank you all for being here.
Thanks so much, comrade. And thanks again to everyone who joined us tonight. I hope what was shared was fortifying for those who've been carrying this work, and hopefully that it will be a catalyst for those who want to get involved, who came to the call tonight with curiosity. Again, we encourage you to join the efforts by signing up at the link that was dropped in the chat. But that's it for us tonight. Thank you so much again. And again, thank you so much to Dawn, Rakia, and Andrea for sharing your wisdom, for sharing your experiences, and for giving us some hope tonight in the face of this long fight ahead, but a fight where we know we have what it takes to get this done. So that's it for us now. Good night, everyone. Solidarity. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.